Why does a simple short tube connecting a machine to a wall require its own dedicated safety deep dive?
So to answer that, we have to draw a hard line between two entirely different systems in your home. When you look behind your dryer, you see that flexible duct. But that duct connects to the permanent dryer exhaust duct.
Okay, so the rigid pipe that's actually built into the structure of your walls or floors or ceiling?
Exactly. And those two things are not the same at all. The permanent duct inside your walls is a fixed architectural feature. But the temporary transition duct right behind the dryer, that is a dynamic exposed component.
Oh, I see. So it has to do a lot more work.
Right, it has to function as both a fire containment device and a high-velocity airflow component simultaneously, all while being repeatedly crushed, bent, and pulled.
So it's basically living in a much harsher environment than the pipe just sitting quietly inside the drywall.
It takes all the abuse, honestly. If it fails at moving air efficiently, your dryer overheats and lint builds up rapidly. And if it fails as a fire safety component during an overheating event, well, the results inside a residential home can be devastating.
Man, that makes the laboratory testing for these products so much more interesting because I was looking through the history of the UL 2158A standard in our sources, and it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually started as something called an outline of investigation.
Yeah, that's a really important piece of history. The industry basically recognized they had a major blind spot. For years, there was no formalized, universally accepted national standard for these specific transition ducts, recognized a severe hazard out in the field before a formal rulebook was even published.
Wow, so building codes were actually referencing this outline just out of sheer necessity.
Yep, long before December 2013. That's when UL finally published the first edition and it became an official American national standard. And, they're constantly updating it.
Okay, so here is where I had my first real aha moment reading through the research. When I hear that a product attached to a hot dryer is being tested by underwriters' laboratories, my brain immediately goes to fire.
Right, you think flammability.
Exactly. I pictured a technician in a white coat just holding a blowtorch to a piece of silver foil. So I was genuinely shocked to learn that UL 2158A is just as obsessed with mechanical durability as it is with flammability.
Because fire performance is only half the equation. I mean, a duct that doesn't burn is completely useless if it falls apart the second you try to install it. The standard requires testing for bending, impact, tension, and corrosion resistance.
Wow. But the one that really caught my eye was puncture testing. I mean, I understand bending the duct to see if it holds its shape, but actively trying to stab it in the lab. Are we expecting sword fights in the laundry room?
I know, it sounds extreme until you actually look behind a typical dryer. It is rarely an empty, pristine space, and the dryer vibrates aggressively during a spin cycle. So if a wire hanger is wedged between the vibrating dryer and the duct, the puncture test uses these prescribed, weighted points that are dropped onto the material to ensure it can withstand that real-world localized stress without unacceptable physical damage or penetration.
Okay, and when they do the bending tests, they aren't just looking to see if the metal cracks. They're actually measuring the internal cross-sectional area, right?
Yes, that is a huge part of it.
Because if you bend it to attach it to the wall and the tube collapses flat, you've just choked off the airflow completely.
Exactly. The standard evaluates these characteristics concurrently. The fundamental question UL 2158A answers is, can this specific product survive the harsh physical realities of being crushed and stretched during installation and still maintain its structural integrity to move air and contain heat?
So the model residential and mechanical building codes set the baseline rules here. First, the duct must be listed and labeled to UL 2158A. Second, it has to be one continuous length.
Right, you cannot take 3 leftover scraps of ducting from a previous job and tape them together to reach the wall.
Makes sense. The code also dictates that it cannot be concealed within the construction. Like, it has to stay in the room, visible. You
Yeah.
can't route a flexible transition duct inside the drywall and just close it up.
Definitely not.
And finally, the code sets a strict limit. The transition duct cannot exceed 8 feet in length. 8 feet is a maximum, not a goal.
Right. Shorter is always better. The inside of a flexible transition duct is not perfectly smooth. It's highly corrugated. So the longer the air has to travel over that corrugated surface, the more resistance it faces. Plus, when you shove 6 feet of unnecessary slack behind a dryer, that material doesn't just neatly compress. It bunches up, it sags, it kinks, and it creates low points.
Oh, and gravity takes over.
Yeah, the heavy, wet lint dropping out of the turbulent airstream accumulates in those sagging low points. The goal must always be the shortest practical continuous length that still allows you to properly position the dryer and access it for service.
So you don't want it stretched drum tight like a guitar string, but you absolutely cannot have lazy loops of excess material coiled up on the floor.
Precisely.
Plastic transition ducting is just universally prohibited by dryer manufacturers today.
Yeah, plastic is a complete non-starter. Under the thermal cycling of a hot dryer, plastic degrades quickly. It becomes brittle, it cracks, and crucially, if a fire does start inside the appliance, that plastic duct immediately melts and becomes a highly combustible fuel source right at the exhaust point.
Wow, okay. This really highlights a vital point about the hierarchy of rules for anyone installing these. A transition duct that meets a general building code requirement does not automatically override a more restrictive requirement from the company that built the dryer.
Exactly. The appliance manufacturer's model-specific installation instructions are the ultimate authority. You cannot assume that just because a shiny product is sitting on a hardware store shelves with a UL sticker on it, it is a universal green light for every dryer on the market.
Which is exactly why the Dryer Vent Safety Council enters the conversation here. That the DVSC steps in and recommends practices that deliberately exceed the baseline minimums just to cut through that confusion.
The DVSC approach is all about removing ambiguity. They look at the landscape of varying codes and recommend a universal standard that elevates safety. First, they recommend no plastic, which aligns with manufacturers.
Right.
But second, they recommend absolutely no foil-type transition ducts, period.
They just take the guesswork and the gray area out entirely.
Precisely. But they go a significant step further regarding the actual fire safety characteristics of the duct material itself.
Okay, tell me about that.
The DVSC recommends that any transition duct used must have a documented flame spread index of 0 and a documented smoke developed index of 0.
Okay.
These are standardized comparative measurements of how a material's surface burns, and they are evaluated using a very specific controlled laboratory procedure called the UL 723 Steiner Tunnel Test.
I have to be honest, Steiner Tunnel sounds like a very grim amusement park ride. How does this test actually work?
It is a serious piece of engineering, for sure. The Steiner Tunnel is essentially a 24-foot-long test chamber equipped with dual gas burners.
Yeah.
They place the duct material inside this tunnel and expose it to a severe controlled fire for approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, 10 minutes of intense fire.
Right, and during that 10-minute window, the technicians are measuring two distinct behaviors. The flame spread index measures how far and how fast the flames travel across the surface of the specimen.
Got it. And the smoke.
The smoke developed index measures the relative concentration of smoke generated. The baseline is usually established by comparing the test material against the burning characteristics of red oak flooring and asbestos cement board.
Let me throw a practical real-world scenario at you then. I'm standing in the hardware store aisle. I'm looking at a wall of transition ducts. If I pick up a duct and it looks like thick, shiny, rigid metal, can't I just safely assume it has a 0 flame spread and 0 smoke index? I mean, it's metal. Metal doesn't burn.
Never judge a duct by its shine.
What do you mean?
Many flexible foil or semi-rigid ducts consist of thin metallic layers bonded together by industrial adhesives or coated in synthetic resins to maintain their shape.
So the adhesives and coatings inside the duct are basically the hidden fuel?
Yes. The metal might not ignite, but the internal non-metallic structures, adhesives, and coatings completely dictate how the product reacts in a fire. This is why the DVSC emphasizes that FSI 0 and SDI 0.
This highlights another massive point of confusion we need to clear up too. UL 2158A compliance and FSI 0, SDI 0 are two completely separate product characteristics.
They are entirely separate metrics. A transition duct can pass all the rigorous bending, tension, and puncture tests of UL 2158A and proudly wear that lifting sticker without ever achieving an FSI of 0 and an SDI of 0.
So a UL listing alone does not guarantee you are getting a 00 rated product.
Not at all. The DVSC applies two separate criteria deliberately. The UL 2158A listing establishes the baseline physical and mechanical qualification for the transition duct to survive the installation.
Right.
The documented FSI 0 and SDI 0 provide an additional elevated fire performance characteristic. A duct might meet minimum codes by just having the UL sticker, but the DVSC recommends looking for both to minimize risk. A transition duct can look like a pristine work of art while the dryer is sitting in the middle of the room. But the moment you blindly force that heavy appliance back into its final operating position, that beautiful duct can be instantly crushed flat against the wall, kinked at a sharp 90-degree angle, or even entirely popped off the exhaust collar.
And suddenly your carefully engineered airflow component is a blocked hazard. So how do we prevent this in the real world? Our sources offer some deeply practical field advice here. First, if the space allows for it, move the washing machine instead of the dryer.
That is an incredibly practical tip for technicians and homeowners alike. By pulling the washing machine out, you often gain clear, unobstructed side access to the space directly behind the dryer. But more importantly, it allows you to install a much shorter, properly positioned transition duct because you can reach in from the side and guide it securely into place while the dryer is already in its final position.
But, a lot of laundry setups don't have that luxury. Many are built into narrow closet alcoves where side access is literally physically impossible. You are entirely blind once you push the dryer back.
True. When direct observation is impossible, you have to use modern tools. Grab a small inspection mirror or, honestly better yet, just use your smartphone.
Oh, yeah.
Slide your phone behind the machine, turn the flash on, and take a photo or a quick video. You must visually verify that the duct hasn't been crushed, kinked, or disconnected during that final push.
I love the phone camera hack.
Yeah.
It bridges the gap between complex safety codes and something anyone can execute in 30 seconds. But our sources draw a very sharp line here between visual verification and objective testing, because looking at a photo is not the same as testing the system.
Visual inspection, whether it's with your eyes or a camera, only confirms what the installation looks like. It tells you the duct isn't visibly flattened.
Right.
But objective testing tells you how the completed system actually performs under load. Good, fair performance characteristics in a laboratory cannot compensate for a duct that is excessively long, sagging, or improperly routed in reality. You need both the right materials and the proper airflow.
This isn't a set it and forget it situation either. The DVSC strongly emphasizes the necessity of periodic inspections.
A laundry room is a dynamic space. A dryer vibrates heavily during every single spin cycle. Over a span of years, a machine can actually walk backward an inch or two, slowly compressing its own duct.
Wow, I didn't even think about that.
People drop detergent bottles behind the machine. Heavy lint buildup inside the duct can increase its weight and cause it to sag over time, creating new low points. Conditions that restrict airflow and increase risk develop slowly over time. Even if the initial installation was flawless, you just have to periodically look for deformation, damage, or signs of exhaust leakage.
We have covered incredible ground today. We took a seemingly invisible few feet of space and exposed the massive amount of engineering, testing, and friction behind it. I want to synthesize this entire DVSC approach into a final, highly actionable takeaway for you, the listener, so you know exactly what the gold standard looks like.
That sounds like a great idea.
First, ensure the transition duct is explicitly UL 2150A listed and labeled. Second, use absolutely no plastic. Third, use no foil-type transition ducts. Fourth, demand a documented zero flame spread index and a documented zero smoke developed index.
Right.
Fifth, use one continuous length of material. Sixth, utilize the shortest practical length. Remember, 8 feet is a strict maximum, not a target. And above all, verify the installation in its final operating position, visually and objectively by checking the airflow outside.
That is a perfect summary of the standard.
Yeah.
And all of those specific rules roll up into one underlying philosophy. Really, consistency reduces risk.